Dear boys, I've been working in the West End all this week and using the tubes and buses a lot. I realized how well some of the girls are doing your job while you're away. Good night, boys. Sincerely yours, Vera Lynn.
Over here in London, we've enjoyed a spectacular, commemoration of all of those brave men and women for victory in Europe. And it's lovely to see the Mall resplendent, of course, in all of that celebratory affair, British flags. I think it should be like this all throughout the year, right, chums? We should be proud, of course, of our wonderful nation. And when you look at the pictures, as I said the other day, it's fascinating, isn't it, when you see, the 80 years between, and there you have King George and the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth, and the princesses on the balcony. And you realise that there are very few things that actually don't change in life. And I would say that's one of them. You look at that picture and it's just the people that have changed. Everything else about the building, the structure, everything is just there. Time literally moves on, and it is the transient of the people, not necessarily the story, as it were. Now, the story I wanted to share with you today, I think it's terrific, naturally, because it's a bit of a history story that, I found about all because I'd forgotten this many years ago. I don't mean I've forgotten this, but I'd forgotten this. Many years ago, I met the brilliant Dame Vera Lynn. And I actually met her, we haven't had a wave, have we? Nice to see you, chums, thank you so much. And it was at a theatrical garden party. And the garden party was at a place called Brinsworth House, which is in Twickenham. And it's a wonderful venue because basically it's a place where you go to stay if you not necessarily fallen on hard times, but you've been in the profession, this game of show business, and then you are, sort of either you need to be looked after or you need some assistance. What I like about it as well, I've got to tell you, all of the rooms are named after like theatres, Hippodrome, Empire, all that sort of stuff. It's just great. And they have a little stage, and every night there are people that get up and do their act. Apparently they have to be atop of the bill. Yes, not knocking it, but it must be fun. And it was at a garden party that I first met Dame Vera Lynn. Now, of course, she's known as the Forces sweetheart to everybody. And Dame Vera was one of those people that literally throughout the war was synonymous with the war. The problem that she had, and this was interesting, because she told me that although she had hits in the 50s, right at the top of the charts again and stuff like that, but because you're in a block, people don't want you to come out of that block. And there lied her problem. It took her a long time, really, even though she was always guests on shows and did many different things. She was incredibly popular with the British royal family, and they just loved her show, particularly this show. It was called Sincerely Yours. Really clever idea, broadcast on the BBC, the Home Service I think it was called at the time, and it came out of various studios, but mainly BBC Broadcasting House in one of their underground studios. She did tell me that occasionally if she was out and about or, they would record it somewhere else. And this show basically was, people sent letters in to her, and you could literally, as she said, you could just write on Vera Lynn, Sincerely Yours, BBC, and it would get to her. That's, can you imagine? That's the power of what these things had back then. Now, you'd be lucky to get the letter, wouldn't you? And this was from all the troops, the GIs, everybody that was listening around the world. And there'd be a little message, and sometimes there'd be a song, that she would play or they'd requested it. But it was basically to let people know around the world that they were thinking of a loved one, a partner, etc. Now, the idea behind the scenes, according to Dame Vera, was, well, to pump up the idea a little bit, the story. And the sort of plot was to see if they could have the very young princesses Elizabeth and Margaret to come on the show to read out one or two of the letters. And I thought this was a really clever idea. And I said, what happened there? And apparently it was all in situ, literally just before victory in Europe, all that sort of stuff. This was probably a little bit later, prior to that, should I say. And she said, they loved the idea because they were fans of the show. And, particularly Princess Margaret loved it because she was very romantic, according to Dame Vera, and just loved the idea of all of these people being separated, but being brought together by the airwaves, Now we'd call it Instagram, wouldn't we? But that was then, right? And apparently everything, as I say, was set in place. The King agreed it, Winston Churchill agreed it, and they agreed a time and a date. Then, near that recording date, there was a terrible bomb situation and it didn't happen, and that had to be postponed, and then another postponement. And sadly, the whole idea of Margaret and Elizabeth going on air to read, so can you imagine if you're a GI or a British Tommy, as they call them, or whatever, and you get your letter read by one of the princesses at that time. It was a very clever marketing gimmick idea to raise the spirits, and literally, the royal family wanted to get involved, but it was deemed too, sort of nerve-wracking, as it were. Then it got out that they could be possibly doing this, so they couldn't use the studios at BBC Broadcasting House because of the fear that the enemy might find out that they were going to record it on this night or whatever. And as Dame Vera said, it's one of those gems, an idea that should have happened, but sadly it just slipped away. As ever, I wanted to share that with you, particularly on this week as the Victory in Europe week, because people say, well, what did the royals do? Well, they were doing a lot behind the scenes. Isn't it a shame, though, that didn't actually come off? When you think, just to have that on record at that particular point. As I said, would have been a very rare thing for Princess Elizabeth, then of course our Queen Elizabeth, to do something like that. And I'm sure she would have liked that one in the memory bank to look at and think, well, that's what I did also in the war. Of course, as we know, Princess Margaret did go on things like Desert Island Discs, and she was interviewed. But this, at that point, wasn't for the Queen. She decided to step away from the microphone forever unless it was a formal occasion or indeed part of the Constitution and the work for the monarchy. Always good to share though, right? Neil Sean in the very heart of London.